All right, guys, looks like 8 o'clock. So we're going to get things underway for today. Looks like we're missing quite a few. But for attendance wise, Lexi, I did see you walk in, right? Are you back there in the corner? Yeah. Okay. See Kyle, see Kaylee, Alicia, Fletch. All right, not seeing Riley, is that correct? Luke? All right. Yes. Sounds like a plan. Okay. All right. Couple of things. Now, first of all, let me just say, expect errors. My end, your end, I'm sure we're going to struggle for our first few opportunities to do this. So just be flexible, I guess, is my moral to the story. And if there's any time you can't hear anything, you can't see anything, if I think I'm projecting something and it's not showing up on your end, just give me a holler if you would. Okay, so communicate with me, let me know what's happening on your end. You're not hurting my feelings in the least. And again, just be flexible, I guess, is sort of our moral to the story. Okay. Couple of guidelines again, since this is our first one here. Let's see. And again, I'm going to struggle with these transitions, getting used to Zoom, even though I've practiced with it, played with it a little bit. Okay. Can you guys see what I'm projecting now? Can you see my reminders? Give me a holler. Kyle, can you see that?
Yeah, I can see it, but it's a tad small, but hard because you put a presentation mode.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear quite all that.
It's a tad small, but it's fine.
Okay. All right. Let me see if I can. It's visible though, at least, I guess. Okay. So just a couple of reminders, since this is my first time in here with you guys, but the assigned seats, and you're already there, so I think you already got that down. Absolutely no worries. Try to keep yourself spaced as much as you can. Make sure you're listening to Mr. Williams as well, and obviously respond and help him out as much as you can as well. When you do speak, make sure you're doing so at a rather loud voice. Sometimes, especially if you're a little bit further back in the room, it's a little tougher to hear. And as I mentioned before, let me know if there's anything you're not seeing that I think you're seeing. We're going to try a few different things today. We're going to mix in a video, a quick little video like we normally have done in the past sometimes. So again, make sure you communicate with me and make sure you can see and hear everything. Okay. One thing that just to clarify for us, at the end of class, I will stop probably 3 or 4 minutes early to allow you guys to do your sanitation stuff and still keep you on time headed to your next class. So we'll wrap up 3 or 4 minutes early. Mr. Williams will give you some paper towels and stuff. Come around and squirt your desks. And again, you guys are responsible for wiping that down. And then Mr. Williams will dismiss you guys periodically, maybe by rows or something, whatever he feels comfortable doing, just so we don't get you guys bunching up in the doorway kind of thing. Hang on to your wipes, your paper towels after you do your sanitation. Hang on to those and just drop them in the trash on your way out the door whenever it's your turn to go. Okay. All right, we are, again, what I thought today might be the better way to do things is just try to keep things somewhat of a routine and maybe establish a little bit of a routine so you get comfortable with what we're doing. Sometimes what I'm going to try to do, at least for the most part, is to maybe do some in-person stuff with you guys and maybe let you converse with somebody else and work with a partner from a distance. So we'll mix in some of those. We're going to experiment with some of that today as well. So again, just bear with it, be flexible, and we'll hopefully get this thing worked out. All right, we are going to head to your guided notes here in just a little bit. So if you would, if you don't already have your computers open, please go ahead and open those up. Make sure your guided notes are handy. And let me switch my screens. And all right, how about that? Still kind of same picture, smaller but readable. Are you guys okay seeing that?
Yeah, you can put it in presentation mode.
A little louder, please.
Can you put it in presentation mode? Work better.
I got too many screens on my thing. I can't see my. How about that? Is that better?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. All right. I'm going to take it off that for just a second. All right, here's where I'll load it back up full when we get to the note part, but we're going to do our little intro here to start with for today's topic. So we talked about back in section 2, the lifestyles during the Depression, what it was like to live, the stress folks went through, that kind of thing. We did, if you remember, talk about President Hoover, and even though he was getting the blame, he probably wasn't the right person to blame, only being in office for 8 months. So what we're going to look at today is that presidency, and is there anything we deservedly should blame Hoover for? And if you remember last class, I talked about how he's probably incorrectly blamed for the start of the Depression, but we could legitimately blame him for not acting fast enough. And so that's where we're going to sort of head today, is taking a look at really what Hoover did not do early on. And when he finally did do some things, it was pretty much a too little, too late kind of story. So let's start with our intro for this section. I'm going to, let me move my toolbar. Okay, we're going to check out Hoover's presidency here real quick with our first little video clip, about 5 minutes here. And what we're going to take a look at is Hoover's role in that Depression. So just a watch and listen for now. And we're going to get to your guided notes as soon as we view our intro. Okay, here we go.
In the wake of the crash, President Herbert Hoover sprang into action. Hoover feared that if the American people...
Okay, let me stop it right there for a second, just to make sure you guys are okay. Volume okay, sound okay, picture okay? A little louder, please.
It's okay, it's good.
Okay, all right, thank you. Do I need my microphone off, or was the sound okay?
The sound's okay.
Thank you.
In the wake of the crash, President Herbert Hoover sprang into action. Hoover feared that if the American people lost confidence in business, the state of the economy would continue to worsen. Hoover began by lowering income taxes, hoping that if citizens spent less on their earnings in taxes, they might be more inclined to invest in the stock market or purchase products. Since income taxes were already low, the new cut gave the public very little extra spending money, and little positive effect was demonstrated in the economy. Hoover was also concerned that the result of the financial panic would mean that businessmen would cut employee wages in an effort to cut costs. Hoover knew that this would have a negative effect on the economy. So he staged a series of meetings with the top business executives in the nation. Hoover requested that workers' wages stay exactly the same. For the most part, the executives agreed, and they pledged not to lower workers' wages. One businessman went a step further to increase the confidence of the American people. Henry Ford made millions in the 1920s by the mass production of the Model T. After the crash, Ford promised not only to maintain wages, but also increase wages for his assembly line workers from $6 to $7 a day. Ford was able to do this by leveling, and in some cases, decreasing wages for the employees who earned higher salaries. But even Ford's attempts did little to change the declining level of confidence that was plaguing the American people. One of the reasons for this was a change in the news media. In the 20s, newspapers focused on the booming stock market and the achievements of heroes like Charles Lindbergh. After the crash, an increasing number of news stories focused on the corruption in big business, hardships in everyday life, and the allegedly increased suicide rates among those who faced financial ruin. Even though the crash affected relatively few Americans in the months that immediately followed, the level of anxiety about the crash, as fueled by the dire stories in newspapers, caused many to spend less money and conserve as much as possible. Lower-income Americans often bought large items on installment plans before the crash, but in the aftermath, they saved what wages they earned, as the threat of layoffs loomed larger. The wealthier class often had the most invested, and therefore had the most to lose when Black Tuesday came. As their extra income evaporated, they too stopped investing and severely limited the amount of money they spent. Small business owners suffered greatly as a result, as merchandise languished away in storefront windows and profits continued to diminish. Banks were also hard hit by the crash. Well over 1,000 banks closed in 1930 alone. The next year, that number nearly doubled. Most of these banks had been speculating in the stock market with their customers' money. As an increasing number of banks closed their doors, more and more Americans saw their life savings vanish. Despite the efforts made by President Hoover to reassure the American people, public confidence in the state of the economy worsened. In previous decades, economic downturns had been referred to as panics. The president felt that panic was too harsh a word and sought another word that would decrease the level of anxiety in the public. Hoover termed this latest slump a depression, and the name took. Hoover maintained his view that the federal government should not interfere with free enterprise. He felt that federal regulation would undermine the capitalist system upon which the American economy was structured. He believed that encouraging industry was an important step toward ending the depression. If industry grew, more jobs would become available, and people would be able to spend more money. He was strictly opposed to any form of welfare program, thinking that giving money directly to the unemployed would strip them of their initiative and worsen the depression. Hoover sought to protect American businessmen and farmers from foreign competition. The result was the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act. The act was passed in 1930, and it raised tariffs on many goods by as much as 60%. The result of the new tariffs was anything but positive. World trade declined, and other countries raised their tariffs to counter the exorbitant American rates. The Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act was supposed to protect the American economy, but instead, it helped deepen the devastation and lengthen the course of the Great Depression. As the hard times continued to get worse, even Americans who'd never invested in the stock market began to feel the pinch. In March of 1930, there were between 3 and 4 million people out of work. That number doubled by the following year. And by 1933, roughly 1/4 of the nation's population was overcrowding unemployment offices throughout the country. Many people took to selling apples on the street corners in major cities in order to support their families. Since few people had any extra money to spend, some store owners accepted other items as fair trade for food and other goods. As bad as things were in the cities, things were much worse in America's farmlands.
During the years of the Great Depression,
All right, so a little bit, a little bit on Hoover himself, and I hope one of the things you gathered from that was the idea that he really tried to employ some psychological principles to this aspect of the Depression. We'll talk about that a little more when we get to the guided notes, but I don't know that Hoover really grasped what the economic principles of a Depression era actually meant. He felt more like it was a citizen imposed kind of depression in the economy rather than something that it actually was based on poor economic principles we had at the time. So let's go ahead and take a look then at your guided notes. Okay. So what we're going to go through today is Hoover's role in especially the early years of this Depression. So we'll start off and talk about his philosophy early on. Later on, we're going to see that philosophy change or shift a little bit once he, I think, finally realized the severity of this economy as it was. So really, early on, Hoover was all about psychology. He really felt like if he could change the mindset of America, the economy would rebound as a result. Well, that might have worked if this were not a depression based on economic principles, economic philosophies that we had in place. But Hoover, I think, I guess, to be nice, didn't realize that. And so his first approach was simply to change the mindset of the American public. One of the things he stressed quite a bit was the idea that continue with business as normal. Well, that's not going to work. People don't have jobs. You don't have money in your pocket. How can business continue as usual? Well, where that comes from is really Hoover's philosophy, and history has deemed that philosophy with the name rugged individualism. Maybe you've heard the term before, to pull yourself up by your bootstraps. When things aren't going well, a lot of times you might hear that, maybe not too much in today's world, but I guarantee you, your parents would know that saying, grandparents would know that saying, something we tend not to use a whole lot anymore. But essentially what you're being asked to do by pulling yourself up by your bootstraps is help yourself. Okay, boots are sometimes difficult to get on, and it takes a little more effort to make those boots fit properly. So if we apply that to Hoover's analogy here, he's telling people to work harder, do something that can help you help yourself. Go look for a job. Well, there's no jobs to be found. Go spend your money. Well, there's no money in people's pockets. Remember your Hoover flags from last class. He really was opposed. I guess what this essentially boils down to is that Hoover was opposed to handouts. He wanted people to find a way to make this work for themselves. Well,
actually, my mom, she worked with some people who got unemployed because of COVID. And because of, what?
Go ahead.
Oh yeah, and because they were on like unemployment and getting that money, like after some time, like some of them went like, I could live like this forever. And they just kind of came to a conclusion that they could just kind of do that, like they gave up.
Yep, absolutely. And I think, yeah, for sure. Yep. And I think, yeah, I think that's a great example of how we sort of see that same effect of the Depression here, even in today's world. That's a great analogy. Absolutely. Well, after a period of a couple of years of Hoover trying this psychological approach, I don't know whether he was convinced by some of his economic advisors, or maybe the light bulb just came on in his own head. But regardless of the reason why, towards the end of the first term for Hoover, he really makes a shift to now putting a little more of the burden on the government. Just to give you an example of what I'm referring to here, we're going to take a look at what was originally called the Boulder Dam. Now it's called the Hoover Dam, in reference to Hoover sort of organizing this project, if you will. So Hoover's new philosophy becomes work projects to employ people. So one of the things he targeted was this originally called Boulder Dam. In total, 700 million was this project's total. And the question that might come up in your head right now, where do we get that money from? And here's the bad news of these government programs that we're going to start to see. These are called deficit spending programs. What that essentially means is that we are spending money we don't have. So every one of these job creation programs that we're going to talk about from here on out through even the next chapter, we're going to be going deeper into debt. And again, it's really the fact that World War II is right around the corner as the only thing that's going to bail us out financially. But temporarily, at least, this is going to put a dent in this depression in a positive way. Overall, we're talking about the purpose of this dam being to create hydroelectric power. Now, is that something that's a necessity? Do we have to have it? Probably not. But this is a way to employ a lot of people in a short period of time. When this was created, it was the world's tallest dam at that time, over 700 feet. And it was the second longest at over 1,200 feet. Benefits: electricity to areas that had not had electricity before. In the 7 states, and you can sort of get a feel for where this is on the map on the slide here, but the purpose or ultimate positive outcome of this was electricity for over 7 Western states, and previously had not had electricity. So yes, this is a great technological step forward. We are also employing roughly around 5,000 people to create this dam. But does that outweigh the debt we are creating? That's a question we'll probably never get an answer to, since we do have World War II right around the corner. Here's what the dam looks like. If you've never been there before, it is quite the sight to see. Not too far outside the city of Las Vegas, but just an awesome structure, again, providing electricity to those 7 different states. What you're looking at is hydroelectric power. This water body back here behind the dam, that is Lake Mead, one of the largest man-made lakes ever. A lot of recreation takes place on this lake. It's nice and calm water. A lot of people really take advantage of that for recreation. But the business end of the dam is actually in the front of this picture. These buildings, these long rectangular shaped buildings that you're looking at in the foreground of this picture, that's where the hydroelectricity is produced. Huge generators down in here. If you ever get the chance to visit this, one of the cool things that you get the opportunity to do is to actually go inside the dam. And they take you down to see these hydroelectric generators down here. And it is just an awesome sight to see. If you ever get the chance to travel and are interested in something like this, I would highly recommend that you take advantage of it. Well, again, this rolls around, this Hoover Dam creation project rolls around towards the end of Hoover's first term. Once he got the dam going, we saw a definite shift in Hoover's philosophy from that psychological aspect that he started with to now more of a government involved philosophy with things like the Hoover Dam. Well, the Hoover Dam wasn't the only thing Hoover tried to do to get us out of this depression. I've got a couple of the groups listed on this slide here as your next fill-ins. For example, he did have a measure to help farmers with the Federal Farm Board. This was, as you heard on our intro video, this was a little bit of an effort to keep farmers afloat in this terrible economy. It was paying farmers to produce less, but again, we're creating debt, remember, but paying farmers to produce less so maybe they can at least keep hold of their land, as opposed to what we talked about in last class with the banks foreclosing. National Credit Organization. Hoover came up with this to try to keep banks open. We saw earlier in the chapter that 28 states don't have banks open. Well, here's a way to sort of stop that crushing of the banks with this credit organization movement that Hoover began. And finally, one of the last things that we'll see Hoover do to try to get us out of this depression, some pieces of legislation. A lot of it directed towards banking, as you can see on your slide here, the Home Loan Bank Act, the Glass-Steagall Bank Act, and the Reconstruction Finance Corporation. These were not only designed to help banks, but people keep possession of their homes as well. Okay, so we do see that shift in philosophy, and really, I think the moral of what we're talking about in the first few slides here is that shift in philosophy from Hoover, from the psychological to government involvement. And what we're going to see from here on out, Hoover's about done as president. He's going to be blamed so much that folks are not going to reelect him, and we'll talk about why in just a second. But essentially, we're going to start to see more and more of these types of programs as a way to try to help us out of the depression. All right, Hoover, one-term president, and here is really what history refers to as the death of Hoover's presidency. It's an occurrence simply referred to as the bonus army. Okay. So what we're going to take a look at next is this event, and we'll lay out some guidelines here for this. And I've got a little bit of a video intro for us for this one too, as our last video for today. But let me give you a little bit of background just so the video makes a little better sense. Okay. All right, we're in 1932. And what you don't know yet is that the World War I veterans were promised a bonus. When World War I ended, the country wanted to do something to thank the veterans for their contributions during World War I. So Congress passes a piece of legislation, and that piece of legislation was a pension, a bonus, if you will, for any World War I veterans. But here's the rub. Here's the thing that makes us sort of question this. Congress in that bill said they weren't going to pay the bonus until 1945, over 20 years after World War I had ended. Well, the veterans know that's coming in a few years, but a group of the veterans thought, what better time to get this bonus than during the Great Depression? Everybody needs money. Why not pay this bonus now? So what we have is a large number of World War I veterans that march on Washington, D.C., and the purpose of their march is to encourage Congress to pay that bonus early. Pay it to us now when it can do the most good in the heart of this depression. Well, that's going to take an additional piece of legislation. It's going to take a congressional vote, and these veterans have decided they're going to stay for the vote itself and continue to try to pressure Congress to pay this bonus early. Long story short, this ends up getting quite ugly. The veterans create a little bit of a camp, I guess we'll call it, on the mall at Washington, D.C., that area in between the Lincoln Memorial and the Washington Monument, where the reflecting pond is. Maybe you guys are aware and remember that from your junior high trip to DC. Well, they made that a little bit of a campground. So can you picture that area with over 15,000 veterans camped out on there? It became an eyesore, to be honest with you. That many people erecting little shacks, tents, anything to keep them out of the elements while they wait for this vote to be taken in Congress.
I guess just like 15 years ago.
Yeah, very true.
They used to it.
Absolutely. Well, this I'm not going to blow the surprise for you guys yet. I'll wait and let the video do that for you when you see what happens to these veterans. But I will sort of conclude the story for you and save that one surprise for the video. The ultimate outcome of this is that the bill to pay this pension early was not passed. And after a period of time, those veterans did not leave the area. They stayed there even after the vote was taken. And over time, they have to be physically removed from this area. And this is where this story gets ugly. So with that, I'm going to shift us over to our last video for today. This one is about the bonus army, so it's going to tell you a little bit of a repeat of some of the details I gave you, but it does summarize everything nice and short here for us on this bonus army fiasco, we'll call it. All right, so check this one out. I think you'll be very interested, as well as probably very offended as to what happened to these World War I veterans. Let's take a listen and see what you think.
Of thousands more were on their way.
I'm going to get my bonus, and I'm going to wait for till I get it. I have to.
In 1932, Washington was under siege. The capital was surrounded by over 10,000 unemployed veterans of World War I from all over the country. Their only assets were the bonus certificates they'd been given after the war, which promised a cash bonus sometime in the future. They needed it now.
At the end of May 1932, nearly 10,000 bonus marchers occupied the nation's capital, and tens of thousands more were on their way.
I'm going to get my bonus, and I'm going to wait for till I get it. I have to wait till 1945. What brought you to Washington? Well, to beat the Undertaker, spend the money before the Undertaker gets it. I know who's made this country worth living in. It's just you fellas. Look, makes me so damn mad a whole lot of people speak of you as tramps. By God, they didn't speak of you as tramps in 1917 and 18. No. Take it from me. This is the greatest demonstration of Americanism we've ever had. Pure Americanism.
President Hoover was left to deal with the veterans when the Senate rejected their demands. The marchers had stayed, camped out in central Washington.
On July 16th, the last day Congress was in session, Washington was on edge. Thousands of angry veterans surrounded the Capitol. Near midnight, the 72nd Congress adjourned. Congressmen left through back doors and underground tunnels to avoid confrontations. The situation had come to a head. The president ordered the evacuation of the veterans from downtown Washington.
Now you bring in the troops.
When MacArthur moved his troops to the affected area, he knew exactly what he was going to do. And he adorned himself in his dress uniform, along with his major aide, Dwight D. Eisenhower.
The force stepped off at 4:30 p.m. More than 200 cavalrymen spread out across Constitution and Pennsylvania avenues. Behind them came 400 infantrymen, followed up by tanks and armored vehicles.
The cavalrymen, one of whom is Major Patton, have got their sabers out.
The soldiers donned gas masks and, without warning, began hurling gas grenades at the veterans. The troops advanced, some jabbing with bayonets.
It's war, the greatest concentration of fighting troops in Washington since 1865.
I knew something was going to happen, that we might be attacked. And I had a press card, so I passed the police lines, and then I saw the soldiers advancing into the camp. And when confronted with this, the men all stood there and said, "Stand firm as long as you can." And they started throwing tear gas.
Tear gas was just burning my face. I was trailing behind my dad, and he kept hollering, "Come on, boy, come on, boy."
Marchers were choking from the gas, just like the battlefields in France.
And so they're being forced out of their shacks by smoke bombs and tear gas, hurled by the troops who have been called out by the President of the United States.
I'd never seen anything like it. They systematically went down the line, burned up all the tents and all the possessions of the people there. I was thinking of Herbert Hoover when this happened, because his election was in 3 months. I thought this would be the finish of Hoover.
The orders of the President must be obeyed. And the roaring flames sound the death knell to the fantastic bonus army. In the shadow of the beautiful dome of the Capitol of the United States of America.
The veterans did not believe the country for which they had fought would ignore the plight into which the Depression had placed them. Many did not believe that United States troops would take the field against them.
By early evening, most of the marchers had been driven across a drawbridge that led to their main camp.
The president does not want MacArthur to cross the bridge. And MacArthur disregards the order. Eisenhower later says that he saw this happen. MacArthur says, "I cannot bother with pieces of paper during a military operation." And so he crosses the bridge.
All through the camp were scenes of panic.
My dad says, "Let's get the hell out of here. The soldiers are going to kill us."
Then troops began to set fire to their wooden shacks. One reporter wrote, "The blaze was so big it lit the whole sky. A nightmare come to life." The president looked out a window of the White House in the direction of the fire, then retired for the night.
And the roaring flames sound the death knell to the fantastic bonus army that ends so disastrously in the shadow of the Capitol of the United States of America.
The morning after the bonus rout, public sentiment took a dramatic turn against Herbert Hoover. If the
All right, that's where I'm going to stop that one there, because that's the gist of what had happened here. But as you might summarize from all this, this is a very bad check mark on Hoover's resume. Picture how the American public would have taken this, from the idea of the veterans who fought for us during the war, who ultimately end up being treated in this fashion. So this was a very big blow to Hoover's political reputation. And typically in history, we talk about this being the end of Hoover's political career. He was not going to rebound from this one. Whether you blamed Hoover for the Depression or not, even if you were probably in favor of Hoover prior to this bonus army event, this really turned your stomach, to put it bluntly. This was something that you really directed your hate towards Hoover for the treating veterans, heroes for the US in this fashion. So we're not going to see Hoover get reelected after this event. Okay. All right, let's wrap up our guided notes then in section 3 for today, and we'll finish by talking about just a couple more details from this bonus army, and then we'll get started on a little activity today. Well, that clash was really what sort of signaled Hoover's political death here. The vote was taken. The Congress had decided not to pay this bonus early. And what you heard on that video is a little bit of an indicator for us, I think. You heard them tell us that after the vote, congressmen snuck out the back doors. So they knew they were doing something that was probably going to spark this uprising. And in order to get those veterans out, the Army comes in. Maybe you caught these two names on the video, but in charge of the Army, Douglas MacArthur, Dwight Eisenhower. Douglas MacArthur will play a huge role in World War II, and we'll talk about him a lot more in those chapters. And same with Dwight Eisenhower. And in addition, future President Dwight Eisenhower. So we'll take a look at those two a little bit further, but this is sort of our unfortunate introduction to those two. Okay, wrapping things up for section 3. What's the end result? What's the end result? What's the impact of this bonus army? Well, we had some deaths, and that made the story even worse. We lost at least 2 or 3 veterans. And we also lost a young 11-month-old baby as part of this violence directed towards the bonus army. So add that to the public fire as well. And ultimately, Hoover's political career is over. He is going to run again, but he will not come close to winning this next election. That's good news, bad news. Bad news, we're going to have a shift in leadership in a very trying time in American history, the Great Depression. Good news, the incoming president, Franklin Roosevelt, is probably someone we could list as one of our star presidents. He's got some good things in store for us. And even though we're going to make FDR's programs sound pretty daggone good, it's too little, too late. So he's going to have some great ideas. He's going to help quite a bit, but it's just not going to be big enough. So when we pick up next chapter, we're going to start right off with that next election, and Hoover will be out and FDR will be in. Okay. All right, let's wrap things up a little bit today with a little bit of an activity to finish off. So I need you guys on your computers again, if you would, and you're probably, looks like still already there from your guided notes. And I need you this time though to head to Canvas for me. You're going to Canvas, you're going to modules, and you're going to chapter 22.
Hey, you know how like a story will get like rebooted with like the main character's son? That's the Roosevelt family.
Very nice. All right, once you are in modules, again, you're going to chapter 22. And you should see a link in that module then called the student folder. Go ahead and click on that student folder, and that should take you to a Google Drive folder. And once you get to the Google Drive folder, you are now looking for a document called the Attack on the Bonus Army. Attack on the Bonus Army.
I'm not be surprised this had less deaths than the Capitol raid earlier this year.
Very true. Yep, absolutely. And that's a great analogy too, as far as a shift in public opinion for sure. Great comparison.
Also, what idiot tried to light it on fire? Won't that spread to like the White House or something? Like it actually burned down the White House. Go, oops.
All right, on that document, I think it's probably self-explanatory what we're going to do here, but I've got a little bit of a reading I'm going to ask you guys to do, and then a few short questions based on your reading. Okay, so we're going to go about another 5 minutes or so before we wrap things up so we can get your desks and chairs sanitized. But for now, start off on that document. See if you can get yourself to the questions before you run out of time here. So I'll leave you to it. And let's see, we'll go probably, we're done at 55. So maybe like at 52 or so, we'll start your cleanup. So we'll go about 5 minutes on this document.
Why did we never touch on the flu pandemic? Like I know hearing about pandemics is like annoying, but the flu pandemic did do a lot of stuff. I can't hear you.
Sorry about that. We did have one slide on that. We mentioned it very briefly, but we probably only spent 1 or 2 minutes on it, to be honest with you. And you know, that's a rarity for me as much as I talk, but yeah, we did throw that out there at the end of World War I. But at the same time, I didn't really want to concentrate too hard on that, to be honest with you, considering what we were going through at the time. So I guess my effort was sort of to try to ease mental stress, because obviously the comparison is that flu epidemic with our current COVID situation. So yeah, we just sort of gave that a light touch was all this year. All right, if you guys want to go ahead and wrap that up for today, obviously you're not done with it, and that's fine. Just hang on to it for now. We'll get some additional time during the next couple classes here. Once you clean up, just hang out at your spot here so we're not grouping up and getting too close to people. Safety first. Where's all my Boy Scouts?
Dropped out of Webelos.
You made it farther than I did. I never even attempted to join.
I was forced into it, so. Or did I join my volition? I can't remember.
I appreciate you guys bearing with the struggles today. It will get better, believe me. So I'm just going to have to get more used to Zoom than what I am and continue to practice it. So I appreciate you guys' flexibility. Just hang out till Mr. Williams dismisses you guys, and I will see you all again on Wednesday. No school Monday, right? That's a group 1 day, or it's supposed to be, but so group 1 will be Tuesday. And then we've got an A day Wednesday. So I'll see you all back online on Wednesday. Different kinds of activities in our in-person days, hopefully not a ton of note days, but today being the first one, we are actually going to do our next section of guided notes. So you will want those handy in just a few minutes. Normally, I'll try to have activities for us that are a little more hands-on kind of stuff. Okay, maybe distantly working with a partner, maybe doing a shared doc, something along those lines with each other. Okay. So again, from a technology standpoint, and just to allow me to practice a little more with Zoom, we are going to do our next section of guided notes. We'll talk about that topic here in just a second. Let's start you with a little visual. Tell me what you think when I get this up here. Tell me what you think you're looking at in that picture on the right. Can everybody see the lady over here on the left? Speak loudly. Yes, no, maybe?
Yes.
Thank you. Okay, what do we think she's doing? What's that a picture of? Any guesses? Is she happy? Yeah, good. Sort of ashamed, maybe embarrassed is the impression we're getting. Okay. Okay. Let me zoom out. And I got to do this strategically because I don't want you to see that sign. How about if I show you the bottom of the picture?
Judging by the top, it says kids for sale. I would assume that you just sold her kids.
You hit it right on the head.
Sweet.
How about that? We talked last class about what life was like, how desperate people were. We saw a couple examples of people taking their own lives last class. We saw people that starved last class, or heard about people that starved last class. How about this for the extreme? And if this doesn't sort of portray for us how desperate things were, not quite sure anything else is going to paint that picture for us. Can you imagine a parent giving up their kids? Yeah. All right, let's move on to our topic today then. Not a whole lot of guided notes, and actually not a whole lot of slides. I think only about 6 or 8 slides today. And our topic today, we're going to lock in on President Hoover. Okay. And we've mentioned this a few times, so forgive me for being repetitive here, but a good time to refresh you on what we've said about Hoover so far and the Great Depression. We made a point a couple times that we cannot blame him for the Depression itself. If we want to blame Hoover, then we can blame Hoover for the lack of action at the start of the Depression. And that's really going to be our focus today. We're going to look at what very little Hoover did at the start of the Depression. And then we're going to take a look at when he sort of changed his philosophy as the Depression got a little bit deeper. Okay, so our main topic, President Hoover and lack of action. We're going to start off with a little video intro. Again, this is going to help me practice sort of shifting between screens here and what you can see and what you cannot see. So we're going to check out Hoover here, first of all, and we're going to lock in on some of the things you're going to hear in the video here. But this is a nice generalized look at the processes Hoover went through, and maybe more importantly, the philosophies Hoover had about the Depression. And one of the things I want you to listen for in this, and I'm going to use this phrase a couple times when we get to your guided notes. Listen for Hoover's approach to the Depression. He does not believe the Depression is a long-lasting event. Okay, so listen in the video, see if you can figure out why he has that sort of psychological approach.
In the wake of the crash, President Herbert Hoover sprang into action. Hoover feared that if the American people lost confidence in business, the state of the economy would continue to worsen. Hoover began by lowering income taxes, hoping that if citizens spent less on their earnings in taxes, they might be more inclined to invest in the stock market or purchase products. Since income taxes were already low, the new cut gave the public very little extra spending money, and little positive effect was demonstrated in the economy. Hoover was also concerned that the result of the financial panic would mean that businessmen would cut employee wages in an effort to cut costs. Hoover knew that this would have a negative effect on the economy, so he staged a series of meetings with the top business executives in the nation. Hoover requested that workers' wages stay exactly the same. For the most part, the executives agreed, and they pledged not to lower workers' wages. One businessman went a step further to increase the confidence of the American people. Henry Ford made millions in the 1920s by the mass production of the Model T. After the crash, Ford promised not only to maintain wages, but also increase wages for his assembly line workers from $6 to $7 a day. Ford was able to do this by leveling, and in some cases, decreasing wages for the employees who earned higher salaries. But even Ford's attempts did little to change the declining level of confidence that was plaguing the American people. One of the reasons for this was a change in the news media. In the 20s, newspapers focused on the booming stock market and the achievements of heroes like Charles Lindbergh. After the crash, an increasing number of news stories focused on the corruption in big business, hardships in everyday life, and the allegedly increased suicide rates among those who faced financial ruin. Even though the crash affected relatively few Americans in the months that immediately followed, the level of anxiety about the crash, as fueled by the dire stories in newspapers, caused many to spend less money and conserve as much as possible. Lower-income Americans often bought large items on installment plans before the crash, but in the aftermath, they saved what wages they earned, as the threat of layoffs loomed larger. The wealthier class often had the most invested, and therefore had the most to lose when Black Tuesday came. As their extra income evaporated, they too stopped investing and severely limited the amount of money they spent. Small business owners suffered greatly as a result, as merchandise languished away in storefront windows and profits continued to diminish. Banks were also hard hit by the crash. Well over 1,000 banks closed in 1930 alone. The next year, that number nearly doubled. Most of these banks had been speculating in the stock market with their customers' money. As an increasing number of banks closed their doors, more and more Americans saw their life savings vanish. Despite the efforts made by President Hoover to reassure the American people, public confidence in the state of the economy worsened. In previous decades, economic downturns had been referred to as panics. The president felt that panic was too harsh a word and sought another word that would decrease the level of anxiety in the public. Hoover termed this latest slump a depression, and the name took. Hoover maintained his view that the federal government should not interfere with free enterprise. He felt that federal regulation would undermine the capitalist system upon which the American economy was structured. He believed that encouraging industry was an important step toward ending the Depression. If industry grew, more jobs would become available, and people would be able to spend more money. He was strictly opposed to any form of welfare program, thinking that giving money directly to the unemployed would strip them of their initiative and worsen the Depression. Hoover sought to protect American businessmen and farmers from foreign competition. The result was the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act. The act was passed in 1930, and it raised tariffs on many goods by as much as 60%. The result of the new tariffs was anything but positive. World trade declined, and other countries raised their tariffs to counter the exorbitant American rates. The Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act was supposed to protect the American economy, but instead, it helped deepen the devastation and lengthen the course of the Great Depression. As the hard times continued to get worse, even Americans who'd never invested in the stock market began to feel the pinch. In March of 1930, there were between 3 and 4 million people out of work. That number doubled by the following year. And by 1933, roughly 1/4 of the nation's population was overcrowding unemployment offices throughout the country. Many people took to selling apples on the street corners in major cities in order to support their families. Since few people had any extra money to spend, some store owners accepted other items as fair trade for food and other goods. As bad as things were in the cities, things were much worse in America's farmlands.
Let's go back to the 19th.
In the wake.
See, I told you I was struggling going from slides to slides. Anyhow, I think what we can gather from the video intro for today, I think we see that Hoover didn't put a whole lot of value on just how strong that depression was. I think we see more of a psychology kind of approach to the depression. And we really, just examples from the video real quick, but the idea that Hoover didn't want to use the word recession because he thought it would create anxiety. He preferred the word depression. I don't know if that's any better, but Hoover obviously felt like it was. So we see that sort of, again, psychological aspect. And I think Hoover probably did not value the economic factors that this depression was actually based on. Okay. All right, so we're going to take that into your guided notes then. So if you would, if you don't already have that document pulled up, please go ahead and do that while I get our slides ready for today. All right, so section 3, this is the last section of the chapter. Again, we're not going to quiz until we're actually done with the next chapter because 22 and 23 actually go together. So where we're going to pick up today again is with President Hoover, and we're going to pick up just after the stock market crash and take a look at Hoover's activities, Hoover's approach to handling this very bad economic era. Okay. First, couple of psychological approaches here. Okay, Hoover really tried to change the mindset of the American people. In essence, think of it in these terms. If I just don't worry about the depression, it's going to go away. Now, there's some issues with that statement, but that is really where Hoover's coming from with these. Gave you a quote here just to give you a feel for Hoover's philosophy. Any lack of confidence in the economic future is foolish. Don't worry about it. Things are going to be fine. This will be a simple recovery. He recommended we go about business as usual. Well, there's not a whole lot of businesses open for them to go about it as usual. Well, where does that come from? What is Hoover trying to accomplish here? And I think it really goes back to Hoover's philosophy just in life in general. Have you guys ever heard the old saying, pull yourself up by your bootstraps? That is where Hoover's coming from. Now, if you're familiar with that phrase, thank you, first of all, but I'm not going to, think ill of you if you don't know that phrase because it is dated. It's not used a whole lot anymore, but I'll guarantee you if you were to say that phrase to someone in an older generation, they would easily know what you're trying to say. That references the actual process of putting boots on. And if you've ever tried to do so, especially boots that don't lace up, boots that are slip-on boots, they are very difficult sometimes to get on your feet. So what did you do? You had to pull a little harder. And that's essentially what Hoover's going to ask the American public to do. Try harder. And if you try harder, things will work out. Well, that philosophy is known as rugged individualism. Rugged individualism. You succeed through your own efforts. If you're not successful, try harder. Look for a job more intensely. Spend money when you can to stimulate the economy. When you do have a job, do your best at it. That is rugged individualism. And Hoover really felt like, especially early in the Depression, that this could be something that citizens could solve with just more effort. Now, here's the bad news. This depression is based on economic factors. And I don't know if Hoover didn't realize that, or if maybe he was never told that, or if he just didn't understand economics. But this is not going to solve the problem. We need some sort of change here. Well, Hoover was not about handouts. He did not believe it was the role of the government to help individuals. And I don't know, maybe that is an area that Hoover does deserve blame. Maybe if he had understood the Depression a little better, it wouldn't have been as bad, but we'll never know. He stuck to this philosophy for the first few years of the Depression, and things just continued to get worse. Well, over a period of time, we see a shift in Hoover's philosophy. Around the mid 1930s, so we're about 4, maybe 5 years into this depression, Hoover decides government is going to need to be involved. So what we start to see are initiatives or programs from the government in a lot of different areas. Some are job creation programs, things that we can do to employ American citizens. Others are simple pieces of legislation to try to help the economy. Right. Let's talk first about the job creation program that Hoover came up with. Okay. The plan itself is to create a large dam out in the southwestern portion of the US. You get a little feel for where it's at here on the map, almost at where the borders of California, Arizona, and Nevada meet. Okay. Just outside Las Vegas, and this is actually about 90 miles outside Las Vegas, the government targets that area for the creation of this dam they are proposing. Now, think about what this means. Think about the technology, construction technology of the time. Yeah, we do have steam-powered cranes. We do have steam-powered bulldozers, things like that. But one of the unique things you're going to see about this dam is that a good portion of it did not use any of those power tools, if you will, like cranes or bulldozers. They did a lot of this by hand digging and shovels. So you can imagine the labor involved here. And if you are wondering why they didn't use the machinery very often, the less machinery you used, the more people you could employ. Yeah, it's going to take a little longer, but you got people to work. And the philosophy is this: if you employ people, those people have money in their pocket. They're going to spend that money. whether it be for food, shelter, haircuts, whatever it is. And that will stimulate the economy. At least that's the intention of this. Now, this project is extremely costly, over 700 million. Now, here's the bad news. We're in a depression. Where's that 700 million coming from? And the answer is we don't have it as a nation. So when we look at these job programs, and this is one of the things you're probably going to get sick of me saying to you over the course of the rest of this chapter and next, all these job creation programs are what are called deficit spending. And if you're not familiar with that term, deficit spending is spending money we don't have. You're creating debt. And eventually, debt's got to be paid off. Now, I hate to say it this way, but these debts aren't going to last long because of World War II being right around the corner. And as we've mentioned with previous conflicts, wars are good for an economy. Okay. Well, what's the purpose of this dam? Well, the overall goal is to create hydroelectric power. So what we have here at what is originally called Boulder Dam, that name will be changed when we get to the 1950s. And in the 50s, they will rename Boulder Dam and now call it Hoover Dam, which it is still known by today. At the time of its construction, it was a feat of architecture to make something this big and this sturdy. Over 700 feet tall and over 1,200 feet long. It was the world's tallest dam at that time. The end result of all this, once this dam is created and water on the Colorado River is controlled, we will be able to provide electricity to 7 southwestern states. Most of these areas had not had electricity up to this point. So for these people, this was a desperately needed utility. Do we have to spend 700 million? Do we need to provide these people with electricity right now? Probably not. But you're going to employ an awful lot of people by creating this dam. And then how about future jobs? How about people that have to maintain the dam? How about electrical workers that will be employed once this dam is created? So there's a little bit of after effect. It's not really just creating this dam, it is livelihoods after the dam is done. Here's what it looks like. If you've ever been there, I think you would agree with me that it is an awesome sight to look at. It is tremendous. If you ever get the chance, I highly recommend, because you can do a little touristy event while you're there. If you take the guided tours of the dam, they take you inside the dam. And let me tell you, that's a creepy feeling too, because the hallways you walk down are dripping with water. And you are essentially standing inside the dam with that water dripping, and you sort of pause for a second and think, oh my gosh, you realize where you are, and it gets a little creepy, to be honest with you. One of the coolest things to see, not only do you get to go inside the dam, but down here in the foreground of the picture, these long rectangular buildings, there's actually an identical one over here on the left side. You just can't see it because the angle of the picture here. But these long rectangular buildings are where the hydroelectric generators are. That's where all the electricity is created and then pushed out to those 7 states. Back here behind it, all this water up on the upper level that you're looking at, that is a very popular lake called Lake Mead. Great spot for folks in the area to do some water recreation kind of stuff. It is one of the largest man-made lakes ever in the world, actually. So this was quite an architectural feat for the 1930s. Still standing today, still holding strong. So obviously they did it right. Well, again, this was just the start of Hoover's shift in philosophy. Put people to work. Other than job creation programs like that, we do see some individual pieces of legislation, and we do also see the creation of some different government organizations. Just to give you a little bit of a sampling here, I've got your next three fill in as your examples here. Number one, the Federal Farm Board. I think by the title, we get a little feel for where this is going, but obviously we talked about last class, just how desperate farmers were, losing their land in a lot of cases. But this Federal Farm Board is now out there to help farmers, help them keep their land, help them continue to grow crops, help them get those crops to market when they're ready. Along with farmers, Hoover targeted banks. We talked about this before as well, that banks were closing at just an unbelievable rate, and that we actually had 28 states without a bank open. Well, National Credit Organization, they're here to help those smaller banks keep their doors open. Other than that, down in the bottom bullet on this slide, you see a couple pieces of legislation: Federal Home Loan Act, Glass-Steagall Banking Act, and another organization called the Reconstruction Finance Corporation. These were targeting individual citizens, measures to help people keep possession of their home. Okay. Now, we're headed in the right direction, but here's sort of the moral to the last two slides we looked at. We had that huge job creation program, Hoover Dam. We had legislation passed to help people. We had government organizations created to help people. But notice the title on this slide. These are good things, but they fall under that category of too little, too late. Hoover has already let the Depression become mammoth. And recovery is going to be even more difficult because we did not act right away. Well, thankfully for Hoover, the light bulb went on. He now sees that the government does need to be involved to get us out of this depression. But Hoover's not going to be president very much longer because of an event that creates some very bad public opinion about Hoover. He doesn't need that. There's already a lot of people that are blaming him for the Depression, as we know. Well, this next event we're going to talk about is what history calls the death of Hoover's political career. Okay. Don't miss this. Your title is actually your next fill-in. So don't accidentally miss your next fill-in because it's up here, not in the text of the slide. But that event that creates the political death of Hoover is the Bonus Army. Okay, now who is the Bonus Army and what are they all about? Well, let me give you 30 seconds of background here so you understand the story of the Bonus Army. The Bonus Army is World War I veterans, no longer in the military, but veterans who fought in World War I. When World War I ended, this is a piece we did not talk about, so this is new. When World War I ended, the government passed a bill to pay World War I veterans a pension, a bonus, if you will, for their service. Now, the sort of weird part about that is it wasn't supposed to be paid until 1945, over 20 years after the end of World War I. Well, here we are in the Depression. Those World War I veterans, they could use that money now. So the bonus army becomes those World War I veterans who march on Washington, D.C. to try to pressure Congress to pay that bonus that's due to them just in the future, but pay that bonus now. Okay, it's a protest, is essentially what's happening here with these World War I veterans. Okay. Now, there's absolutely nothing wrong with protests, as we know. But this one turns ugly. And it creates a political and public relations nightmare for President Hoover. These veterans have marched on Washington, D.C., and there is an enormous amount of these folks, well over 15,000 people. Well, remember, we're in the Depression. So where are these people going to stay? They don't have money to go get a hotel room. So what we see happen are these 15,000 veterans arrive in Washington, D.C., and they build this little shanty town, Hooverville, if you will, in Washington, D.C. And they build this Hooverville right in the Washington Mall. And if you don't know what the mall is, if you don't remember that from your junior high trip to D.C., the Washington Mall is the area between the Lincoln Memorial and the Washington Monument, that long strip of land in between there. You maybe remember the reflecting pond. That's part of the Washington Mall. Okay. Well, these 15,000 veterans have built shacks all on the Washington Mall. They're going to stay there until the vote is taken on this bill. Do they get their pensions paid now? The short answer to that question is no. Congress does not approve paying this bonus now. They're going to make the veterans wait until 1945, like originally promised. Well, the vote was taken. The question is over. Congress has said no, but the veterans stay in Washington, D.C. They've got no place to go. And that's when things turn really bad. I'm going to bring in our second video for today about the bonus army. And this will give you a little feel for just how nasty things got. And eventually, this is what ultimately costs Hoover his political career. So check out this little bit of information about the bonus army. This is towards the tail end, well, not tail end, the second half of the video. Originally, you're going to hear about a reminder of what Hoovervilles are. That's only about a minute of this video, and then you're going to get into the bonus army portion, which is what we want. So let's check out a little more detail on this bonus army and give you an idea of what it looked like in Washington, D.C.
During the years of the Great Depression, Hoovervilles sprang up across America. What was a Hooverville? Why was it called that? As the Great Depression continued to worsen, many who had lost their jobs were forced to leave their homes. With no place to live, these individuals, and even entire families, were forced to find shelter wherever they could. In many cases, the only option was for the homeless to construct shacks or shanties made out of anything and everything they could find. Boxes, wooden crates, tar paper, and even old sheets were being utilized as makeshift homes. Villages of these shacks sprang up in parks and empty plots of land throughout the country. Many cities would not allow the homeless to congregate in this manner, so the shacks would show up on the outskirts of town or just outside of city limits. The term shantytown became quite common to describe these types of dwellings. However, because so many in the nation saw President Herbert Hoover as being responsible for the economic woes, a new name emerged. Many began calling these villages Hoovervilles. In 1932, a disgruntled group of homeless World War I veterans decided to create a Hooverville inside Washington, D.C. They placed their little community on the National Mall, in between the Washington and Lincoln monuments. Another Hooverville was set up just across the Potomac River, where it could be seen by those in Washington, D.C. Between the two locations, more than 15,000 veterans, their wives, and children had gathered together. Their purpose was to protest Congress and the president, demanding that they receive money they felt was owed to them. In 1924, the War Adjustment Act had been passed. This law stated that all veterans would be paid a bonus to make up for the wages they could have been making during the war. Unfortunately, this money was not supposed to be paid until 1944. In the midst of the economic hardships they were facing, these veterans insisted that the money be paid sooner rather than later. They refer to themselves as the Bonus Expeditionary Force. The Bonus Expeditionary Force was told by the authorities to disperse and return to their homes. However, many of them didn't have a home to return to. Nearly 2,000 members of this bonus army refused to leave. President Hoover ordered General Douglas MacArthur to remove them from the city. Using tear gas and rifles, troops quickly cleared the National Mall before crossing the Potomac to move on to the second camp. The nation was in shock. American soldiers had attacked homeless veterans, setting fire to their shacks and huts. The veterans and their families fled Washington, D.C., but received no better treatment in other places. Virginia, Maryland, and Pennsylvania all instructed them to keep moving along. Former soldiers, sailors, and Marines, who had once been thought of as heroes, were now viewed as thieves and degenerates. Once again, many saw Herbert Hoover as the source of this dilemma. Voters would express their disgust with the president when they went to the polls in November of 1932.
So that is what represents Hoover's political death. You can imagine the public relations nightmare. You can imagine the American opinion. You just had an army, our present day army, attack our veterans of World War I. And regardless of whether you supported World War I or not, you don't mess with American soldiers. You don't mess with American veterans, heroes. And this became just the worst possible scenario for President Hoover and his popularity. Hoover issued the orders. Things got ugly. There were actually veterans that were killed as part of this conflict. There was actually a baby, 11-month-old baby, that was killed as part of this as well. So ultimately, just a solemn end to Hoover's political career. Hoover's going to run again, but because of this event, history looks back at this and tells us, you know, he probably had a pretty decent chance to get reelected. He had started those programs like job creation, the Hoover Dam. He had started to pass legislation to help people. And a lot of public opinion was turning in favor of Hoover. But after this event, after this nightmare where American heroes were attacked, some were killed, Hoover's not going to stand a chance in this next election. Little bit of an interesting side note before we move on from the bonus army. Did you catch in the video who the military commander was that went into the bonus army camps? Down here at the bottom of the slide, Douglas MacArthur. And his top aide was Dwight Eisenhower. If you do not already recognize those two names, Douglas MacArthur will be a lead general in World War II and also in Korea, by the way. And Dwight Eisenhower will also be a very prominent general in World War II and eventually our president in 1950. So our introduction to these two big names of history, not necessarily off to a good start with this attack on the bonus army. Last couple of slides here. What does all that mean? Well, again, Hoover started slow. Psychological approach, change your attitude, and we can change the depression. Not going to work, but Hoover's philosophy based on that rugged individualism that he used in his personal life. Work harder. Well, that wasn't going to make a difference. He started to make a change. Hoover Dam, government legislation, and then the downfall, the bonus army, and that public relations nightmare. Because of that, Hoover's political career is essentially over. And if you notice the notation I have on this slide down by your fill-in, you need to add that last statement to your notes, please. I do not have a blank for that. You do need to add that to your notes, please. You will see that conclusion on your next quiz. Okay, what was the end result of the bonus army? And you will tell me it was Hoover's political career ending. Or if you just want to call it like I did, the death of Hoover's political career. Okay. With that, we are going to wrap up the chapter at this point. We will actually start next chapter with this election of 1932. Hoover is going to run again. They had to. The Republicans had to. Otherwise, it looks bad on your party if you don't re-nominate a president who is eligible to run again. So Hoover's going to run, but he will be facing a new voice in politics by the name of Franklin Delano Roosevelt, FDR. And FDR has had some success as governor in New York during the Depression, putting a lot of people to work. And the rest of the voting American public will see what FDR has done in New York and believe he can transfer those policies to the nation and get us out of this depression. So we'll see about FDR's presidency when we start our next chapter. Okay. All right, that is the wrap up of your guided notes. You can go ahead and close those up if you will. We got about 3 minutes left, it looks like. So we're going to get you to your cleanup stage. So if you would, you're wiping down desks, you're wiping down chairs, and then stay there. Do not throw away your paper towel. You're going to wait till Mr. Williams dismisses you and deposit your paper towel in the trash on your way out. I appreciate it, gang. I won't see you guys until, remember, you don't have school Monday. Tuesday is a group 1 day. And then Wednesday is an A day. So I'll see you all again on Wednesday. Okay. Does it feel weird being back in the building? That's a definite head shake, I think. Yep. Got to imagine the hallways feel a little different.